And good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the webinar for the 8th version of the BRC Global Standard for Food Safety. My name is John Kukoly. I'm the Americas Director for the BRC Global Standards. I've been with the organization for approximately 10 years now. So this is the 4th version I've seen come through the organization, and it's always an exciting time that when we roll things out. To answer the first question, slides will be made available to everyone who registered. They'll be sent out via an email or the link for the Perry Johnson website will be made available for you after this. If you'll just give about 24 hours for all that to complete, it will all be available. I think many of you have probably attended webinars in the past. You know generally how it works. There is a chat or question portion of the controls. If at any time you would like to ask a question, you don't have to wait to the end. I will not go into the questions until the end, but by all means, if a question comes up as some topics are covered, please type your question in so that we can address that at the end. It's always interesting to cover that part, and that usually really focuses in on what people are interested in looking at. So with that, I am going to begin our webinar. A little bit about the background to issue 8. And the reason we do this, it's important for us to really explain I'm just gonna just roll all that out. It's important for us to make sure that everyone understands that BRC doesn't sit in an office and write a standard. We don't try to simply every couple of years, let's make it a little harder, let's make it a little tougher. We view it very much as that we are the caretakers of this standard. We are the compliance, we ensure it's rigorous and well maintained, but the standard itself is for the industry, the global food industry. So we start basically building our next version as soon as the last version is published. So we're now, we've got a little file for version 9 and things that you run into along the way. So there's feedback all the way from version 7 that we've come along. GFSI, they're benchmarking, very, very proud to be benchmarked by the GFSI group, and they've got a set of requirements, that standards that are recognized by them need to meet. Generally, they're fairly minimal standards, but they make some adjustments every now and then. And this time, they put some requirements in for environmental monitoring and a few changes about food defense. So we want to make sure that we're addressing those requirements. A big thing for BRC, here's our mindset about duplicity of audits. We're in the food industry. That external pair of eyes, that external challenge for us is vitally important. It's how we maintain being as good and stable as we are. But when you get into, when you go from 1 or 2 audits to 10, 12, 20 audits a year in your facility, you now are spending far too much time managing audits, touring auditors around, explaining what you do, and not enough time focusing on food safety. So one of the things we strive to do is make our audit as inclusive as possible. And we're always bringing it to specifiers or people with their own audits to say, is there something we can do so that you'll recognize this rather than return and do a duplicate of this same thing, because at some point you're not adding any value. A lot of good legislation came out in the world. Food Safety Modernization Act in the US, Safe Food for Canadians is now out, other global regulations. And by no means do we simply take all regulations and dump them into the standard and say, let's meet everything. But we do. I mean, regulations are produced. There are some very good things in FSMA, and certainly it had an impact on the way we structured and looked at the standard itself. The practicalities of including food safety culture. I mean, we know that if you talk about cutting edge food safety, culture is on the list of things to talk about. And we spent a lot of time and brought a lot of experts to the table to understand how do we fit that in. The standard itself, and of course, we look at what's going on in the industry globally. What are the causes of recalls? What's going wrong, and how do we make sure that those who choose the standard as their certification tool really are best protected or best able to mitigate those risks that a lot of other people see. I'm going to touch on timing because it's important, and there's really only a couple of dates. Yes, we're published, done. We have pretty much completed training all of our trainers, so they have been upgraded, and we're in the process of releasing the training materials to those qualified trainers. So anytime from now forward, you'll see that official BRC training courses, conversion or full courses, are available and we'll talk about training a little bit towards the end as well. The big date, February 1st. And that's first day of audit. So if the first day of your audit is anywhere up to January 31st, it will be version 7. If it's anything, if the first day of the audit is February 1st or later, it's version 8. That's just a hard changeover we do. I'm going to spend most of the time speaking to the requirements. This is where, first of all, it's most important for the sites because this is stuff you have to meet. This generally is what pertains to the site, whereas the second part I'm going to touch on, protocol, has less impact on the site. That's more about the auditors and certification bodies. So I'm going to spend the majority of time speaking about the key changes to the requirements. Now, just to put everything in context, this is not going to be everything you need to know to pass a Food 8 audit. This is going to be what I've intended to do, because there are a lot of little changes, and there is a change document that's available from us. It's really highlight those things that you need to start thinking about now. So if your audit is in February, March, April, May, maybe even June, there's some things you need to start looking at, because they will not require a 1-month quick turnaround and you're ready to go. This is something, there are a couple of big pieces in here that I want to touch on. You need to identify, okay, how good are we at this point in that topic, and what do we need to further invest in or study or train or build to be able to satisfy that and be ready for when our audit takes place. So this was a long debate, especially the last 6 months or so, whether or not we called Section 1 leadership or senior management. And it was very, very close. In the end, we decided simply to stick with the other standard, or our other standards, packaging, logistics, things like that, and keep it as management commitment for now. But we really are changing the direction this is going in, and much more assessing leadership. And you know yourself. I mean, that doesn't require a lot of explanation. The difference between leadership and management. Management is just making sure things are done the way they're supposed to be done. Leadership is actually setting a course towards improvement and a higher level. So expect the assessment of management to take an increased focus during the audit. Expect the auditor to spend a significant amount of time with the senior leadership of the site, talking to them about a number of things: their culture, their objectives, how they manage the site, what's important, what are their key risks coming up, where are they going to, what are they watching, what has an impact. So expect the senior management, the quality director, quality manager will be sitting off and holding base on this one, but it's really trying to assess the involvement, support of the senior leadership. And of course, when we get into that culture, which I'm going to talk about next, but expect them to be much more involved in the audit itself. So when it comes to culture, we like to expand, not just, hey, we threw this requirement in. Why? I think anyone who's been active in sort of the leading edge understanding of food safety management really accepts the fact that, hey, culture is important. It's going to be a challenge. It's hard to measure. It's hard to speak to at some point. We're just beginning that journey. But BRC has always been the leading certification program for food safety, so it's only natural that we would take that leadership role in bringing culture into the requirements of the standard. It is challenging to audit. There's no question whatsoever, but it is vitally important. And so we put a requirement, and what I'm going to do is give you the exact requirement with an explanation. But effectively, we've asked the site to develop a product safety and quality. Remember, BRC is safety and quality, culture and culture improvement plan. So here's the exact requirement. Site senior management, we know that, will have a plan for the development and continuing improvement of the food safety and quality culture. So again, this is going to be a discussion with senior management. It's really about, remember, there are a number of steps that you need to engage in. One is you need to understand a little bit about food safety culture, quality culture, organizational culture. Second, you need to have some mechanism of measurement. There are a whole bunch of different mechanisms. BRC has the culture module. If that's of interest, there are a number of others. We don't require any one particular to be done, but you need to have a measuring tool. Once you measure, then you could now say, okay, we know where we are, let's get a little better. So very much the ISO 14001 mindset of continual improvement. It's just, you know, you're never there, you're always, but you have to know where you are and know how you're going to get a little bit better. To be very clear, the auditors are not being asked to give your culture a grade. So people with bad culture don't get low grades, people with good culture don't get high grades. Everyone can get a little bit better. So if everyone's taking that step to get 10% for improvement in their culture, we're all in the same boat, and that's really the experience. So this is something that you're probably going to need to do a little bit of research. You may need to talk to your certification body. You may need to do a little bit of training on measurement techniques of food safety culture. But that's going to be a piece that's assessed during the audit. In this first section as well, in the management part, tied very closely to culture, everyone would agree, food safety, food quality, everyone's responsibility. It's not just the quality teams, it's everybody's responsibility. We expect all staff to know their role and their responsibility when it comes to culture. And we've added a couple of additional requirements, which we're going to look at now. 115. And that's the knowledge part. So when I'm performing an audit at your facility, I should be able to speak to just about anyone in that facility and ask, what is your role in protecting the safety and quality of this product? What's your, and what would you identify as things not being right? How would you identify them? What does it mean? And then what do you do about it? So that they really understand from their perspective, from everyone's individual perspective and ability and competency, what good is, what bad is, and what do I do about bad. In addition, 116 talks about a confidential reporting mechanism. And this is going to be one, again, that requires a lot of thought in how to build, how to put together properly, how to do so you're getting benefit. This is the first time I'll throw this out, and I'll probably say it again. We don't expect you as a facility to be doing anything to make BRC or the auditor happy. These are industry best practices. So that if I'm the person on the end of the line on the midnight shift, and I know what the product is supposed to look like, and I see it's not always being done right, and I think there's some shortcuts, I need to be able to tell the senior management of the facility without repercussion, which is why we put the confidential aspect in it. And you know, it has to be dealt with within the facility. So the senior management will have a process for taking this information in and dealing with it. Now, we understand there is some confidentiality, there's some sensitive nature to this, there's a privacy nature. We realize it is going to be somewhat challenging to audit, potentially, but we also realize that in the vast majority of cases, it's quite unlikely this will get used, but it provides that opportunity for those few cases where it is of value to add to the safety and quality of the product. HACCP, or the food safety plan. Big surprise, there's nothing new in HACCP or food safety plans. It's really, we haven't changed anything. So why is it on here when we talk about version 8? About when the Food Safety Modernization Act, when the first preventative controls rules really started coming into play in U.S. facilities, we got a little bit of feedback on occasion that either sites were themselves choosing to have parallel food safety plans, a HACCP plan and a food safety plan, or a BRC plan and a food safety plan, or whatever you want to call it, or that on occasion auditors thought that they had to be distinct, separate plans. What we wanted to clarify, and this is more to people that are in process of building their plans, and certainly this goes into the auditor training, is that nomenclature is meaningless in BRC's eyes. So whether it is a significant hazard, a CCP, an OPRP, a critical point, we don't care, nor does your auditor. You build a system that's structured and named as you see fit, as works best for you as an organization, and as long as it has all of the parts that the relevant FSMA requirements have, or whatever regulations you fall under, and the BRC requests, we don't care about the structure, color, labels, names, anything like that. So it's just a reiteration of, we don't care what it's called. We do recognize that it's it's generally a bad idea to have parallel plans for the same product. You're better off to have either an integrated or an amended plan than have two separate distinct ones and try to manage them. So that's just an assurance that we're going to continue to work with the auditors on that respect to make sure. And we appreciate any feedback on how that does or instances where it doesn't work that well. When it comes to food safety, there are a couple of hard programs that absolutely pay back. Supplier approval is definitely one. Internal audits is definitely one. And obviously your risk assessment, your food safety plan or HACCP plan is the core. When it comes to internal audits, we think this is an area where there's still a lot of improvement. The whole concept of internal auditing, your expected outcomes, your design, we still see there's a lot. So what we did as a change, and you go back 2 versions and we said you will internal audit your entire food safety program, including the requirements of the standard. And what generally happened was people took a couple days a year, went through the entire standard, put a bunch of checklists on, really not getting a lot of value for the effort put in. Last version, or the current version, version 7, we changed that to multiple times during the year, or spread out throughout the year. You can see where we're going on this. In this version, we've said at least 4 distinct events throughout the year. So multiple times throughout the year equals at least now 4 distinct events. That does not mean you go through the entire standard 4 times a year. What I strongly recommend is you have at least one person on your food safety team who is very, very good at internal auditing. And remember, this isn't just about food safety. This can be maintenance, this could be operation, this is finance, everybody should do internal audit. The concept of internal audit is very much, if you're going to pay to have something done, you should on occasion verify that A, it's being done correctly, and what you're doing results in the desired outcome. That's what internal audit is. It's just a verification. And you think, well, how am I going to, what do I do? Just take the standard, split it into 4 quarters and do a quarter each? Probably not. I'll give, what I always recommend is backing up. Don't start with the standard, start with your operation. What's important? You've got 52 different cleaning procedures. Well, why don't you every week internal audit 1? Take the copy of the procedure, go watch the sanitation, check off that it's being completed, verify that, use that as the example that we're going to do an internal or a pre-op inspection on, make sure it's done, sign off the person's name, great. We did an internal audit for that person on that procedure. We'll do it again next week. So you can see how very easy it is to split up internal. So it becomes a way of doing business as opposed to a once a year event that we're going to have to rush through and get a document ready for the auditor. Another example, you've got 12 different people who could possibly receive ingredients on your ingredient or in your receiving department. If you did an audit of your if you did an audit of your receiving once a year, that means you're only checking each employee every 12 years. Receiving is hugely important. Are you willing to go 12 years between verifying that it's actually being done correct for each employee? Why wouldn't you do 1 a month so that in the course of a year you get, or maybe 1 every 2 months? So you can see how easy it is to split your operation into activities so that you can utilize internal auditing to really ensure you're verifying it properly. And I just threw that little best practice. That's a great little guideline on how to do internal audits. But as I say, I think designing an internal audit program is hugely important and a skill set that not always everybody has. So here's the exact clause. The yellow part is the change, the important part, and it just says at least 4 different events throughout the year. I think 4 to 1, once a quarter internal audit is probably not the best either. I would push to see it continually getting more and more frequent and more value add. This is the other big piece, and as I said, supplier approval. If you think, you basically have 2 options. We'll open the receiving doors, let whatever we can find come in those doors, and then we'll try to figure out how risky it is, whether or not we want to use it or how to make it safe. Not the best plan. Better idea is let's push that safety fence out another layer so that when we place an order, we're confident that whatever's going to come in is going to add to our product safety and integrity, quality, and not potentially detract from it. So let's push that ring of trust out another layer. Let's make sure that we're utilizing approved suppliers as much and almost as exclusively if at all possible. So there's some changes from GFSI, but essentially what it is tightening down on level of expectation. Not surprisingly, those of you who know preventative controls realize that BRC was completely aligned with the expectation of controls, basically identifying those high-risk suppliers and making sure that they are actually audited at some frequency. And the reason I threw this up, primary packaging, when we talk about suppliers, we always talk about raw materials. Raw materials, in our definition, are ingredients and packaging. And of course, as soon as you say that, someone says, what packaging? There's such a thing as food contact packaging. We didn't do that. We call it primary packaging. Another term that means the same could have been functional packaging. Basically, if we're producing a consumer-ready product, everything the consumer will bring into their home. So if it's a bottle of wine, the bottle, the cork, the cap, the label, all of those are primary packaging. If it is business to business, if it's I don't know, a muffin mix going to an industrial bakery, well, it's going to be the bag, the internal liner, the label, and any printing of instructions or care or use that goes on the outside of that. So effectively, anything that's going to enter into the operation or the home as a whole. So no, not pallets, not shrink wrap. Shipping containers, I would say look at it from the perspective of, are those shippers going directly into production areas? Do they convey any information that we want to make sure is correct? Or are they simply something that's stripped off outside of the operation? So defining primary packaging allows us, and now I got to skip that one section, allows us to understand what the supplier requirements are. And I apologize, I seem to have skipped a slide here. I've got to go forward and wanted to see if it's there. No, it's not. So we'll touch back on supplier approval again, but effectively what we're looking for is that suppliers of ingredients and primary packaging are all approved. Approvals would include preference, obviously, for GFSI certification, secondarily, a qualified audit of another type, and again, the same requirements beyond that. So when we talk about food defense, and this was one of the things driven a little bit out of regulation, a little bit out of GFSI, the change here is really now we're moving from only looking at external threats, which is what BRC Food 7 concerned itself with, to now we've included that it's both internal and external threats are the concern that we have to make sure we're aware of. So slight change, I think for pretty much everyone in the US will probably have completed that already. External to the US, that may be a change over previous expectations. Physical contamination is still an issue. And it's odd stuff, well, not odd, it's unsurprising stuff, but very simple things that we tend to see. If you look at global incidents of physical contaminants in product, it generally falls into two categories, other than glass containers themselves, which is a small proportion. So when you look at the vast majority, it really falls into two things, and it's writing utensils and ingredient packaging. Those are the two most common physical contaminants we tend to see in food products. It's generally BRC is extremely risk-based, where we look at things very much from a higher level. But this is a case where we thought, you know what, we just need to put some prescriptive requirements in to keep BRC certified sites as good and as safe as they've always been. So what we want to do is making sure that when you're opening packaging of ingredients, that itself doesn't become part of the packaging, or does not become a hazard. And it's pens, it's writing utensils, that's the key. And I did not put the requirements in here. So what we've done is put two new requirements in place. One is that you do a risk assessment of opening ingredient packaging, deboxing, decasing, opening, to make sure that you've identified any potential risk areas where physical contamination can occur based on that packaging, and you've put appropriate controls or training in place. And secondly, pens, and there's nothing new in the requirement. It's something that we should all consider. No small parts, no easily detachable pieces, and where you have a metal detector in your facility or further downstream, there should be enough metal in the pen to trigger an alert. Realizing that you may not have, you won't have an all metal pen, but certainly if there's enough pieces of metal that are part of it, should it get lost in there, it should trigger a metal detector so that we can do an investigation. This is another one of those ones, very much like culture, that we're going to have to sit back and really take a good look at. This previous versions to before version 7, there was a comment that came out on occasion, which simply said there's no requirement for the facility to be clean. And it's true, there was no requirement that said previous to version 7, the facility should be clean. If an auditor went in and it was suitably unclean for the situation, they would write a nonconformity, but there was no absolute place to put that as far as one clause that identified that. So in version 7, we put in a clause that said you will have, the facility will be clean. Now, environmental monitoring is not a new expectation for anyone. It's always in there. It's always probably popped up in the risk assessment or part of the sanitation program, or it's always inherently been in there. It would be a rare occasion for an auditor to audit most facilities and accept the fact that there's no environmental monitoring program whatsoever. But we've prescriptively put it in. We felt it was necessary, both from a regulatory change standpoint, GFSI standpoint, and we just thought there was a little bit more guidance that was needed for facilities that are coming in. So to go into details, the part in green is important to read and understand first. A risk-based environmental monitoring program will be in place for, and this is important, both pathogens and spoilage organisms. So when you're designing your program, you have to think not only environmental from pathogen control, but also spoilage organism control, whether or not that's relevant. And as a minimum, you must have one where you have open, ready-to-eat product. As I say, just because you don't have ready-to-eat doesn't mean cross it off the list. We never need an environmental monitoring program. That's not what the standard says. What it says is everyone that needs one will have one. Everyone that has ready-to-eat product will have one. But there are some occasions where non-ready-to-eat product may not require an environmental monitoring program. Those 3 requirements I broke down and defined them very simply, because that's the way you should approach this, not by reading the full requirement and start putting little bits and pieces in place to try to gather enough stuff to do to satisfy the requirements. Rather, step back. Even when you have an environmental monitoring program, you need to step back. This is like a HACCP program. It's not done once and walk away. Whoever did it 20 years ago, we just keep repeating the same thing all the time because they made it 20 years ago. Environmental monitoring is a crucial component. It always needs challenge and review. It has 3 parts. 411.8.1. Properly designed. Expect the auditor to spend the majority of their time on this aspect. What's the basis for your program? Why those sample locations? Why those organisms? Why that frequency? Why that test method? So, again, expect to need a certain amount of knowledge and competency in understanding environmental risks for your specific product type or category, and being able to design a program that satisfies that. So not just here's a sample plan, it's here's the explanation. And I always recommend considering writing up the thought process or the design process, all the considerations that went into it, so you can go back, make sure you covered everything, and maybe make some challenges later on. Second part, 411.8.2, understand what good and bad is. Appropriate limits. What happens when bad is bad? What do we do? not only for the product itself, but what are the next steps? And a caution, environmental program, the corrective action to a fine should not simply be wash, test, and if it's good, carry on, never mind anymore. And third is always important when a risk assessment is the review triggers. Every risk assessment you should do, you should think of two things at the end, very last step. When should I do this? Is there an expiration date? Should I come back in a year and 2 years and 6 months and look at it again just to make sure I covered everything properly? Or what would be a sign? What would be an indicator that this isn't working the way it's supposed to? What would tell me that, hey, there's something not quite right in this? So if we look at some of the requirements, design, be able to explain it. Good documented procedure, but also the explanation behind this. So if you're in a facility that someone else designed an environmental monitoring program and you don't have any, you got the program, but you have no idea why, I would recommend starting, not throwing out, but put it aside, start again and see if it is properly designed. The other two pieces that come into play on here are the requirements for corrective action and limits. And this falls out of design. Are you using indicator organisms or are you using specific target organisms? Remember, we have to talk about both pathogens and spoilage organisms. So make sure we're looking at something that's appropriate for that. And then those triggers. One of the triggers to consider including, and it's specifically written in the standard, is a prolonged absence of results. So when we do our testing for environmental monitoring, we get results, data. It's important to have those corrective actions for the data, but it's also important to look at trends and look at direction things are headed. And one of the trends that would be a concern would be, we've had an environmental monitoring program for 6 years and we've never found anything. I think that's, that should at least trigger are we looking properly? Are we doing this right? And then other things we would look at would be shelf life of our product. Are there any changes to that? Complaints, concerns, spoilage, anything like that. So what would feed into the question of maybe we're not finding it with our environmental monitoring program? You all know the production risk zones: high care, high risk, ambient, high care. I actually like it. I thought it was a very, very progressive move a couple of versions ago when we introduced that into the standard, and it has been very beneficial. It's certainly one of the things that has BRC standing out amongst the GFSI programs. Nobody else has this. Nobody else has this kind of rigor. So for high risk and high care industries, people know that, well, if they're BRC, they're at a significantly different level than some of the other standards. One of the challenges we had was being able to document and explain it properly. We struggled with that. We made some changes in the last version. And although we haven't really changed the requirements at all in this version, what we've done is we've pulled them all out and we've created Section 8. So you all know there were 7 sections in the standard. We've now put Section 8. Section 8 is high care and high risk. And we've taken all the requirements out, put them in there to streamline. It cleans them up so that if you're not high care or high risk, it gets them out of your way. It also does make it much more clear and concise in the layout of it. So hopefully that makes a beneficial change for you. I want to touch on some of the protocol changes because I think that's important. A few little things have changed that you may see during your audit. This is one of the more interesting ones. Again, more and more people are using BRC for their supply chain. And one of the challenges that we've seen is the time difference between the audit finishing and the official release of information approved by the facility to the customers. And that's been an ongoing challenge that your customers have often said, great supplier, 99% of the time our suppliers we don't need to worry about, but when there is an issue, we don't like to wait the 42 days or 49 days to hear about it in their audit report. Now, remembering, it's the site that owns the audit report. It's a site that owns the audit data. That audit data doesn't go anywhere unless the site has granted the approval. So what we've done, we've made a big investment in upgrading our directory, our database. Still ongoing. We're going to see it, bits and pieces are getting released as we go along. But one of the things we're going to be able to do by the time version 8 goes live in February is there will be a interim report. So basically that report that the auditor leaves behind, here's your site details, here's the nonconformities, no other details. That will be actually uploaded onto the directory. And you as a site will have the choice to share that with anyone you wish. If you have customers who said, you know what, we really need to see that kind of visibility, rather than you emailing or faxing or somehow getting them copies of things, it's really about being able to share it through the directory. So that's been a nice positive change. Remember, it is entirely up to the site to decide who gets it, when they get it, how much they get. So those are the big changes. You see, we've got a couple. Culture. It's going to be, step back and do that right. We've got a few changes to supplier approval. We'll continue push to get that internal audit mechanism done properly. And as well, we really want you to look at environmental monitoring from a program design perspective. So what kind of help can you get? There is the interpretation guide. We've got a key changes document. We don't have a frequently asked questions document yet because we just published it last month and there haven't been enough questions to make the document. That will be coming out later in the year. And all of our understanding guidelines, I showed that in best practice. I showed that best practice for internal audit. That's key. A reminder that all of this stuff is available on BRC Participate. Many of it is downloads now. We've made some changes in Participate. The biggest change is it's free for all sites, and that started this August. So if you're a certified site, you have access. All you need to do is go to our inquiries desk and ask that you get, go in, you'll get set up with a access code, password, and you'll be able to get all these documents free of charge for certified sites, which is hugely important now. Obviously, you can download a copy of the standard from the bookshop at any time as well. Training, and this is where you can come back to Perry Johnson and really start, if you need some training courses, ask them about what's available. We have a number of training courses. We've renamed them a little bit, made it clear. It's either a site course or an auditor course. I will be honest, that 5-day auditor course, about 75% of the people that take that are site personnel because they want to know everything the auditors know. It's also a very deep dive into the standard. A lot of discussion during that with auditors about evidence, what are we looking for, what looks good, what looks bad, things like that. But effectively, the ones that are probably most of interest, if you've taken a BRC training course before, you probably want to do the conversion course. Recommendation is the site conversion, auditor conversion. If you take that one, you're going to be dealing with some audit report stuff as well. If you've never taken a BRC training course, I recommend, the 2-day course. I recommend you read the standard first. It's a good, these trainers are excellent. Or as I say, the other consideration would be that 5-day auditor training course for new auditors. So it really is a spectacular course. With the 8th version, we are reintroducing our global markets program. We've struggled with this one a little bit. What exactly it's there for. What BRC has not wanted is simply a lower bar. So we did not want a program that simply says if you can't reach the BRC bar, here's a lower one you can reach. We'll give you an audit that matches that. We've wanted to build it as an auditor training mechanism as well as a site development mechanism. So we think we've got everything in place. And primarily we're targeting 3 languages, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. So obviously Latin America is a big part of that. The FSMA module, this is hugely popular both within the US and outside. Was relaunched in last month, and the change was the previous version only looked at preventative controls. This looks at all the rules, so it's a much more substantial document. It again, free to download. Please use it. If the Food Safety Modernization Act impacts you, please take a look at that and make sure that you're covered. We took this perspective of BRC. We know covers about 98% of the regulation. If you're BRC, you're pretty good, but there is there's some prescriptive stuff that we don't match. And what this does is call out the prescriptive stuff and tell you what you need to do to be able to adjust. One of the simplest examples, BRC says relevant records must be saved for shelf life of the product plus a year. Food Safety Modernization Preventive Control state relative important records need to be kept for 2 years. So the recommendation is make sure you keep your records for 2 years. There's a little more complexity into some of the requirements, but it's actually a very good one. Whether you add it to your audit, get the official report and be able to add that, you know, either for a comfort level double check or for foreign suppliers to be able to send into the importers of record, it's a good one to take a look at. And that new module is out now, although it's tagged as version 7. That we don't expect to see any significant change for version 8 because we didn't change some of those prescriptive things. And before we get on to questions, and a reminder for those of you who have questions to type away and get them in there. This is something we're very proud of. Every year in the US, we do our conference. It's going to be in San Diego in May of 2019. It's very well attended and it's very well liked. People appreciate it both from the kind of the thought leadership perspective we take on the information we provide, and secondly, it's an excellent networking event that's always a good time. So hopefully we can see you there. And with that, I think we're going to move on to questions. I'm just going to leave that up so we have something to look at. So at this point, do we have any questions that you would like answered? We'll give you a minute or two. I don't see any current ones that are in there. So if you have a minute or two specific questions about some of those requirements, please type it in the Q&A section and we'll answer them as quickly as we can. In the meantime, I'm assuming some are going to go. A reminder that audits start on February 1st, so we'll be able to take a look at that. And at this point, I must have done a fabulous job because I'm not seeing any questions. I'll give you another minute to see if there are any questions that come up. You all have found that little question section to be able to put on there to see where to add them. Well, then I'm going to assume at this point, since there are no questions, I thank you very much. If you do have questions, get in touch with BRC or get in touch with Perry Johnson. It would be fabulous to hear from you. Thank you very much. A reminder that a copy of these slides will be available and made available to you on the website. And with that, I wish you a good afternoon.